Hello, good afternoon or good evening. Thank you for being here. And so, this is about, from all the meetings we had, this is the most difficult. Although it seems easy.
Seems nice.
Yeah. Why do we need poetry? Why do we need poetry?
Because we have free time.
I didn't catch, I'm sorry.
Because we have free time, maybe.
Ah, I see.
It facilitates or fosters creativity.
Fosters creativity,
It's strong.
strong,
It
strong
gives
message.
the message strongly and shortly.
Not necessarily shortly.
But if you look around, if you open a newspaper, would you find poetry in it? You might be surprised, but until a few decades ago, newspapers had sometimes poems even on the first page, you know, and they always had literary supplements. They had a big involvement in the topic of poetry. Now it's completely gone. If you go outside, if you talk to people, very few people are interested in the topic of poetry. If you ask them, tell me a poem, probably they don't know, or who's your national poet, they don't care. So what happened? How is it possible? I usually make an example. Sergei Yesenin, very famous Russian poet, he was married with Isadora Duncan. So Isadora Duncan was a big star, movie star, singer, dancer. She was like, I don't know, today is, help me there, movie star. Angelina Jolie, right? Today it's unthinkable to imagine that Angelina Jolie would be married to a poet, right? So something happened. But what happened? And why did it happen? Why we almost completely lost interest for poetry when it was a fundamental component of society? Our grandfathers, our grandmothers, they used to memorize poems without problems. If you go to an old Russian, they still can recite Pushkin by heart. An old Italian, educated old Italian, Leopardi, or now it's almost gone. You go to a bookstore, there are no poetry books. You go to you open a newspaper, there's nothing mentioned about poetry. In America, there are chairs of poetry at universities, but it's the usual thing where academia try to take control of something, because like you cannot be a poet because somebody tells you are a poet, either you are a poet or not. You cannot go through an academic process to prove that you are a poet. What is poetry about? What is the code of poetry? There is a British psychologist, Reynolds, who said that the dream is an involuntary kind of poetry. You remember, we spoke, I think, about the dreaming. You know, the dreaming is a language. You know, it's a language to which the subconscious communicates to the conscious, and it's some sort of poetic language because it uses forms, messages in a way that is not just straight as it is. The language of there's a good poetry and there's a bad poetry, right? There's a poetry that would say, for example, let's make an example of a bad poem. Deep as the sea, right? That's a bad poem. That's as deep as the sea. Blue
Where's this guy?
as the sky. There you are. You know? Those are examples of bad poetry because it's banal. It's the most simple image. It doesn't enrich you. You know. I had this problem many years ago while writing something, and I had to come up with the definition of a book and non-books. Because what you find around mostly are non-books. So what is a non-book? A non-book is a book that you can read from cover to cover and you haven't learned anything new. Not even a word, not even a concept. Everything you already didn't change you a bit. The same thing applies to poetry like that. You know, if I say blue as the sky, I find it. Got it. Blue as the sky. What else? Huh? While a great poet changes the metaphor. For example, I made some annotation. There was an American poet, Jane Mayhall. Let's get rid of this because it's even ugly to look at it on the board. Jane Mayhall. She wrote something. Your absence is. Your absence is. How many things you can put after that? And then she wrote, I need to close my eyes. It's a beautiful line, isn't it? But this line, per se beautiful, it's made even more beautiful when you know the story behind it. She lost her husband. So, your absence, whenever she thinks of the absence of the lost husband, is a need to close my eyes. Meaning, to go back somewhere where you're still there, you know? So the poem is communicating a deep experience, but she doesn't need to go into the details. Through the beauty of the line, you get something. That it is written, but it's not written at the same time. So through this we reach immediately the core element of poetry, because poetry is usually used for what? Love, romantic, right? But romantic doesn't have just one direction. You know? Oh, Romeo, tell me, are you Romeo? It's not just that way. There's a book, a poem actually. There's a poem that was made famous by the movie Four Weddings and a Funeral. And it's a poem by W.H. Auden, one of the most famous British poets of last century. It's called Funeral Blues. And it's a love poem, but it's about the death of a beloved. The poem starts with, stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with the juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with the muffled drum, bring out the coffee, let the mourners come. And then he goes on, and then he talks about his beloved, saying, he was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. And then the last line is, for nothing now can ever come to any good. So this is a romantic poem, but a very sad poem, because it's a broken heart. But being Auden such a great poet, because poetry, not being a direct message, not being the we are used to talk today in referential terms. What that means? A is A. If I say this is a pencil, right? And I hold the pencil, A is A. This is true, right? This is referential definition of truth, which comes back to Aristotle, who says that veritas est adequatio Rei et intellectus. It's, as usual, you know, you're getting used to the Latin. Seems to be complicated, but it's not. Truth, veritas, is a relationship between Rei, the thing, the pencil, and the intellect. So, this is a pen. This is pen. There is correspondence. It's called also the correspondence theory of truth. So that's the meaning into which we all understand truth to be true. That's not the meaning of poetry. Because poetry can tell you things and can give you references that are beyond the just adequatio between thing and the intellect. And we go back to this poem. Remember the line, the stars are not wanted now. Auden is a British poet. So there is a famous passage in Hamlet, one of the most intense love statements of the history of literature, where Hamlet is saying to Ophelia, doubt, thou, the stars are fire. Doubt that the sun doth move. Doubt, true to be a liar. Doubt, truth to be a liar. But never doubt I love you. Shakespeare, and now you recall again, you see the very, very subtle reference, you know. The stars are not wanted now. Doubt the stars are fire. But now they are not wanted because here is Hamlet declaring his passion in the way that Hamlet can do, right? To Ophelia. Here is the hand of passion. So these stars that makes me able to tell you about my love, not wanted anymore. That's the reference that poetry established between things. But again, doubt true to be a liar. If I try to make such a statement as a logician, I will be crazy, deemed insane. But in poetry, it makes perfect sense. Because it's a series of actually very logical crescendo, you know. Doubt that the stars are fire, that the sun doth move, that this and this and this, but you cannot doubt that. So it's giving strong certainties for us to prove an even bigger certainty. That is the certainty that he loves Ophelia. And this is something you cannot express in any other language. There is no other language but poetry to express such a feeling, because poetry is exactly feelings. Let's go to the language of poetry. Now let's go a little bit deeper into this language. I would like to, probably it's a long poem by Gertrude Kolmar. I like her because of her story and because of her. But anyway, let's. I'm going to read a little poem by Amy Lowell called "The Taxi." When I go away from you, the world beats dead, like a slackened drum. I call out for you against the jutted stars and shout into the ridges of the wind. Streets coming fast, one after the other, wedge you away from me, and the lamps of the city prick my eyes, so that I can no longer see your face. Why should I leave you? To wound myself upon the sharp edges of the night. It's clear, right? She is trying to express this feeling, you know, that when she goes away from him, everything, the world beats dead. Remember, we don't need the stars. There is this element of poetry, that is the cosmic element, where that establish a connection between our feelings and the universe. When I feel love ache, the entire universe is sorrow. When I'm happy, the entire universe is happy. Now, a bad poet again would say, oh, I'm so happy today, this is so beautiful, the sky is bright and blah blah. No? A deep poet will turn that into a seawall. Another poem by Julia de Burgos. I'm going to make a seawall with my small happiness. I don't want the sea to know that pains go through my breast. I don't want the sea to touch the shore of my heart. I have run out of dreams, crazy from shadows in the sand. I don't want the sea to look at blue morning in my path. My eyelids were auroras when the storm crossed. I don't want the sea to cry a new rainstorm at my door. All the eyes of the wind already cry me as dead. I'm going to make a seawall with my small happiness. Light happiness of knowing myself. Mind the hand that closes. I don't want the sea to arrive at the thirst of my poem, blind in the middle of light, broken in the middle of an absence. This is a very beautiful and profound poem because she is trying to protect herself, you know, by building this this defense against the sea. You know, because the sea, the movement, the sea represents. You remember one of the most famous images of life is related to a river. It's the famous Pantarei by Heraclitus. Pantarei. Which means everything flows. Which is not an original statement of Heraclitus, but we don't want to go on that. And everything flows, life flows, the river flows, the sea flows. What she's going to do? She's going to build a seawall. She's going to stop the movement. She replies to that movement, constant movement of life that gives and takes, with a seawall. Because she wants to protect my small happiness. Of course, she can't do that. We know that it's impossible. But in the poem, that's what she would like. That's the expression of her feeling. And we all understand that. Because the movement of life gives and takes. If there would be a safe place, you know, something to build against it, a seawall. 24 centuries after Heraclitus, there is a poetical response to that. This is a beautiful poem, but it's a beautiful Spanish poem. Me retracto de todo lo dijo, by Nicanor Parra. And here, there is another aspect of poetry where the poet is telling to the reader to stop. I'm going to read it in English if you want to have Spanish for that. I'm not going to do that. Before I go, I'm supposed to get a last wish. This is the poet before dying. Nicanor Parra was a Chilean poet who lived a very long life. Generous reader, burn this book. It's not at all what I wanted to say. Though it was written in blood, it's not what I wanted to say. No lot could be sadder than mine. I was defeated by my own shadow. My words took vengeance on me. Forgive me, reader, good reader, if I cannot leave you with a warm embrace. I leave you with a forced and sad smile. Maybe that's all I am. But listen to my last word. I take back everything I've said. With the greatest bitterness in the world, I take back everything I've said. Me retracto de todo lo que he dicho. It's just the poet that asks the reader to burn the book that he wrote, because he's afraid that he didn't reach. But what is he afraid? Is he afraid that the A is not A in your mind? And this brings us again to the very peculiar aspect of poetry. Borges was a great poet and a great writer. He used to say that the reader of a book has the same right of interpretation as an author. So there is no point for an author to say, oh, it is how it is, because I said so. Because the reader said, yeah, but I understood this. And unless your understanding is completely out there, just because there is a illegitimate interpretation, we discussed this. If Jack the Ripper says that he did the horrible things he did because he interpreted the Matthew's Gospel, you can say that's an illegitimate interpretation. But if Calvin and Luther and St. Francis did what they did because they interpreted the same Gospel, well, you cannot really honestly say the one is more right than the other, because there is a space for legitimate interpretation. The same thing happens to poetry. Today we have this understanding of poetry as it were science. So we say, oh, if the author, yeah, it's one of the author is a reader as well. Some authors would say that they wrote the books that they always wanted to read, Anyway, and you see in there is a mention about the shadow that reminds me of a sentence by Octavio Paz, who said, "I'm the shadow my words cast." The reversal, not the author that is somebody who imposes a message, but the opposite, the message that imposes itself upon the author. So that's why we don't want poetry to enter our society. First of all, because it's not we have no use for it. Poetry is not useful. Same as philosophy is not useful. Why should be useful? Useful is a hammer, is a wrench, is a plate to eat something, is a glass. Poetry should not be useful. So that's already a big problem. In a society that tends to see everything in terms of its usage, what use has poetry? He said something when you have a lot of time on your hands. We don't have time,
Yeah.
right? But there is another aspect. When poetry tells you, there's another line about that from a Portuguese poet, Ibn Amar of Silves, the south of Portugal, when there were still Arabs in Portugal. He used to say, "My eye frees what the page imprisons." So poetry is also a way to discover a uniqueness in the words that only through you can become real. So in a society that wants to see everyone the same, poetry tells you, but you're not. One more reason not to have poetry. Poetry has been deemed in many circumstances as subversive. Think of Mandelstam. Mandelstam was sent to Gulag because he wrote one poem that he never published. He wrote this poem, humoristical poem about Stalin. He read that poem in his living room to a couple of friends. The next week he was in a Gulag. He died in Vladivostok because he wrote one poem. So poetry can be subversive. Poetry can scare the great Stalin, the head of the Red Army, somebody who has secret police, weaponry of all kinds, was afraid of a poem. Not anymore. Today you can write as many poems as you want. Doesn't, because poetry is not anymore part of society, because it's not anymore part of our lives. It's something we have gained or lost. My humble opinion is that we have lost through that, but I would like to go into the debate on that. Thank you.